Stephen King's Rose Red was the first horror movie that I ever watched. I was about like 13 or 14 at the time, and my parents had burned a DVD of it, and I found it in like the family DVD case. And I probably wasn't supposed to watch it. I was probably a little bit too young for it, but 13-year-old me was terrified. There were some scenes in there that I could not sleep with the lights out afterwards. Just horrifying, and I have been fascinated ever since. Of course, looking back on it now that I've consumed just about every ghost story I can get my hands on, Rose Red is not that terrifying as an adult. It has its moments, for sure, but not all of the effects from the early 2000s hold up, frankly. I still rewatch it every few years or so, though, partially because it was my first, but also because it's just good. But about a month ago, I found there's a book. It's called The Diary of Ellen Rimbauer, and it was released prior to the release of the miniseries as like marketing stuff. Apparently, it was a bestseller at the time. It's essentially kind of a prequel, I guess. It's a retelling of how the haunted house became haunted based on the perspective of kind of the main ghost, which I don't think is spoiling anything. Um, One thing that I thought was odd was that Stephen King wrote the screenplay for Rose Red, and then they got someone else to write the book based on his screenplay, which, I mean, when you get a famous novelist to write the screenplay, you think that they're going to get the famous novelist to also write the book, especially since the novelist is Stephen King, who writes like a million books a year. It's not like you're asking George R.R. Martin to come up with something. Like, that just, I thought that was just really odd, and we will get into it. But oddly enough, in order to understand the book, you're going to have to understand the miniseries. It's available to watch on YouTube, so if you haven't seen it, I would advise you to go and watch it. It's a good time, and then we can come back and discuss. But if not, or if you've seen it before, let's get into a little recap, a little bit of analysis here. So the miniseries opens with Annie. Annie is a 5-year-old girl at this point, and she has telekinetic psychic powers. We see her after she's been bitten by the neighbor's dog, and she destroys the neighbor's house because she's mad and she's 5. Um, as mentioned in the trigger warning, Annie's autistic. She's largely nonverbal. And if you're thinking, oh God, this is another one of those, yes and no. I mean, like, it's a cliche, and it's a bad cliche, and it's a problematic cliche, but also I think there are ways that Stephen King deals with this in a way that goes deeper than that. I'm not saying it's not problematic, but it's not as bad as you think, I think. Anyway, we meet her as a 5-year-old, seeing that she has these incredible psychic powers. We also realize that her parents hate her, which is great. And we also meet Sissy, who is her big sister, kind of basically her parent, because her parents are useless. So that's how that opens. Next, we meet Professor Joyce Reardon, who is the supposed author as well as the Diary of Ellen Rimbauer. Apparently she like edited it. It's the whole ghostwriting thing. So just keep that in mind. But essentially she is a professor of the supernatural. She studies the supernatural as like a scientific phenomenon. She's a professional ghost hunter. We get kind of a sampling of her personality here. She's very determined. She is obsessed with this house called Rose Red. It's apparently just like this like portal vortex, just like all of these, like, it's really, really haunted, essentially. And she wants to get her little paws on it. Essentially, her plan is to gather a bunch of psychics over Memorial Day weekend, bring them all to the house, and see if they can wake up the house.
I told you this before, Dee. Waking up Rose Red is not a good idea.
She is going to take all of the scientific equipment and she really wants to monitor it. And they're doing this right now because Rose Red is about to get demolished. So we find out slightly later that Joyce is boning the Rimbauer boy. So the Rimbauers own Rose Red. That's like their ancestral home. And Stephen Rimbauer is dating Joyce, and he is going to demolish the whole thing. It's going to be turned into condos. Which, of course, those condos are going to be super haunted. Great. But essentially, she wants to get in there and document stuff before the place is torn down. So she's trying to get all of these psychics on board, and we see her trying to get Annie on board, and also our next lovely guest of the house. Emery is kind of a prick, and we get that, but also upon rewatching it the last couple of times as an adult who has kind of been beaten down by the world, I really identify with him more and more over the years.
Hey, whoever you are, save the warnings for someone who's not broke, okay?
Like, Emery can see the dead, and he's just kind of totally over it. And also, he's broke. We get a little scene with his mom as well, who is just a delightful human being.
What runs with Hester and Fester, Emmy?
Hester.
And essentially, Emery is doing his best to get as much money out of Joyce as possible, which, like, fair.
25,000 is a trifle low. If you were to be offering a bit more, say 7,500, for instance.
That's Emery for you. We next have this scene with the boyfriend, Steve Rimbauer, Joyce's boyfriend, where they're kind of like talking about her obsession with it, and like he's kind of touching on like, I don't even know if you like me, I think you're just using me for the house. She's like, of course not, babe. She's totally using him for the house. But like also he's hot and like about to be a multimillionaire, so like get it, Joyce. Also he's like 10 years younger than her. I'm kind of impressed with her ability to pull, honestly. Steve seems like a nice guy. He's fine. He's coming along for the ride. So Joyce has a little orientation meeting next for the expedition into Rose Red. And this is kind of where we get the like download of all of the haunted history. So apparently it is built on an Indian burial ground. I know. Anyway, and ever since they started building the house, it's essentially been just one death after another. And like we'll get more into the haunted house and the history of it as we talk about the book later. But essentially what you need to know is John and Ellen Rimbauer. John is like 40, Ellen is like 20. They get married. John is an oil tycoon who wants to build like the biggest, fanciest, most grotesque display of wealth ever seen in Seattle. As they break ground on Rose Red, one of the workers there is possessed, essentially. He kills, I think, his foreman, and he doesn't remember anything afterwards. Legend has it that he went to the pub and he didn't resist arrest, and he was like, oh, really? Oh, I don't remember that. That's so weird. Wild. Wow, I must have really been having a day. So we get the first death. Joyce mentioned briefly that while the house was being built, John and Ellen went on this like giant honeymoon, basically just to like all of the places that John wanted to colonize and hunt in. Just terrific man, John. Just what a guy. And essentially Ellen gets really, really sick. When they're in Africa, she meets a maid called Sukina, and they become besties because Sukina nursed her back to health. She insists on bringing Sukina back with her. How consensual that is on Sukina's end, I don't know. According to the story, Sukina is like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. We're besties now. I want to work for her my entire life. But essentially, Sukina comes back to the house. The Rimbauers have a bit of trouble getting pregnant and like getting a baby. Eventually they have a son named Adam and a daughter. I forget what her name is, but they have a daughter, a son and a daughter. And then it goes through a list of all of the other people who have essentially been eaten by the house. So the house has eaten, I believe, John's business partner. It's eaten a couple of guests and like tourists. It's eaten a movie actress that Ellen really liked when she had a big party on New Year's Eve one year. Essentially, the house just likes to consume people, particularly men. Women tend to go missing, men tend to die. We find out as well that Ellen contacted a medium while she was at the house. The medium had some interesting reactions to the place and also said
Great Graham wouldn't die until the house was finished. Great Graham told her it was finished, and Madam S told her it isn't finished until you say it's finished. Until you say.
that's kind of the whole gist of the house. We get another scene where Joyce is attempting to get Sissy and Annie on board. So Joyce knows about Annie's psychic powers. Annie is about like 15 now. And Sissy is like in her early 20s at this point. Sissy is the one facilitating the conversation between Joyce and Annie because Annie can't really advocate for herself, and Sissy really wants Annie to go to a good school that can kind of help her flourish because obviously the public school system is garbage. Sissy is really reluctant, and I think this shows that Sissy is treating Annie like she's an actual person who like might not want to go to the house, who might not be able to do anything, who like might be putting her in danger. And there's this whole thing of like, if Annie and Sissy's parents find out about this, Sissy is like going to be cut off. So it's like pretty high stakes for her. And it really seems like Sissy is trying to do the best thing for her sister, which is to get her money so she can get out of the house where her parents hate her. And yeah, the character is called Sissy. Everyone calls her sister because that's her entire identity. We do find out later that she has a name, but essentially everyone keeps calling her Sissy the entire movie. After the orientation, a bunch of the psychics go out for drinks afterwards. So we get to meet Vic. He's the old guy. He can see the future. We also see here that Vic has a pretty serious heart condition that he needs to take medication for. I'm sure that won't come up again. That's fine. We have Kathy, who is an automatic writer. We have Pam, who is the hot one, who is clairvoyant touch. So she'll touch an object and she can see kind of its past or like people who have touched it, stuff like that. Then we have Nick, who is British. It's his personality. And he does a little bit of everything. He's kind of like a mind reader. He sees things sometimes. So that's kind of the rest of the group. So earlier on, when Joyce was introduced in her class, we get a scene with a school newspaper photographer and writer who is trying to trip her up. This photographer is working for a rival professor who wants to get Joyce kicked out of the department. Joyce finds out that this guy is trying to revoke her tenure, and it seems like if she doesn't come back with anything good from the Rose Red expedition, she's out of a job. We have this really great scene where Joyce is just, here you go.
Hot instead of just warm. It is a world full of mysteries. You don't like it, do you?
We see that Joyce is a very intense person, but also it's hard not to like her because that guy's such a dick. And don't you also kind of wish that you could, like, terrify your enemies that much? I wish I could terrify my enemies that much. So that's kind of like, Joyce is really at, like, this breaking point, and she needs this to work real bad. Of course, everything is going to go fine, right? What could possibly go wrong? So this is where we get our first real glimpse of Rose Red. The photographer who's working for the evil professor, he is going to try to sneak in so we can get some like really good shots of them having like a seance or whatever. So he rolls up to the door. Sukina answers, which is weird because she looks like she's 30 when she's probably been dead for a while. So we see him go into the house like a complete fucking idiot. Good luck, my dude. Everybody rolls up to the house. We see that the gang is all assembled. Sissy and Annie have decided to come, which everyone is really excited about. And we also see that Emery has decided to come. We get a little scene of the trade-off with him and his mom, which, like, we feel bad for him because obviously the woman is awful, but then he's a total dick. So we feel less bad for him. They go on a tour, obviously, and we get to see some of the cool rooms that Rose Red has. We see that it's just a sprawling mansion and that it also builds itself. So we get the sense of if you go back and count the rooms, you'll get a different number each time. The hallways change, you might get lost. We have a buddy system kind of established, so you're not supposed to go anywhere alone in this house. Do we think that they're going to follow this for the rest of the series? No. No, we don't. But while they're exploring the house, they find the photographer's phone. We also get a little bit more backstory where Joyce and Stephen tell us about April's disappearance, which is the daughter of John and Ellen. So April was playing in the kitchen. Sukina stepped away for like a second. The house ate her. Not great. We get a couple of like minor little ghostly happenings as they continue to explore, kind of setting us up for the fact that this is definitely super haunted. We also get Steve talking a little bit about the one time that he was alone in the house. His mother, who was an alcoholic, had come treasure hunting and left him alone for a few minutes, and he saw a glimpse of presumably Ellen Rimbauer. So we know that the house has definitely wanted to eat him, but it hasn't been able to get its hands on him yet. Now, this is where we get our first real kind of ghost sighting. So the ghost put on a little light show. It clearly is entrancing Annie. She can sense something about it that the others can't, presumably because she's so psychic, we hope. And they stop the light before it eats Annie, but the house clearly wants her. It's like set its sights on her, and Joyce is just like, so we get the sense that Joyce is just so excited about this. So night falls, and the house gets going. First terrifying thing that we see, which this is the thing that used to really get me when I was younger. This is the scene that terrified me, and I'll just let you soak it in for yourself.
Oh, don't. Want to get it on?
We then also get a scene where Pam is lured out by a fake Kathy, while Kathy is stuck in her room, just kind of being traumatized.
Come on, hurry up.
What is it?
It's Steve. He's found something amazing. It explains so much.
Explains what? What are you talking about?
So Pam is going to go out for a little walk in the middle of the night. We also get a slightly less terrifying scene with Alice and Annie. Or sorry, April and Annie. So April wants to be friends. Why not? So this is really the fun and games part of the movie where we get to see a bunch of ghost action and see the characters get terrified and see them start to realize that they are in way over their heads. This is kind of my favorite part of the movie. This is peak entertainment for me. In the morning, we find out that all of the phones are dead, conveniently. So there's no going in or out. This prompts Emery's mother to come looking for him, for her little baby, because he didn't call. Luckily, though, somehow, the cell phone from the photographer works. Instead of using that to call anyone and let people know that they're okay or that they might need help, Steve decides to call the professor and leave him a message, causing the professor to also come to the house. So we have everybody here. We see in the morning that Vic is talking to Pam. He's having a little conversation with her in the garden, which would be really sweet if we didn't also see from Annie's point of view that Vic is talking to no one because Pam is now a ghost who's been eaten by the house. This is not great news for Vic. We have this really sweet moment with Steve and Annie where they're like communicating, and I think it really highlights what Stephen King is trying to do with Annie's character, which is like everyone can see her as a person, can communicate with her as a person. She clearly has like likes and dislikes and an actual personality other than being autistic and psychic, which I really like because in a lot of these cases they don't even go that far. And I think it's interesting that the only people who don't see her as a human are the villains. So Joyce sees her as a tool, Emery sees her as a burden, her parents see her as a burden, but everyone else sees her as a person. So I think that's at least shows that Stephen King was trying to be thoughtful about this representation. Whether or not he was super successful, that's not for me to decide, but it feels like they were trying to do something here. We also get a moment here where Sissy can see Annie and Steve communicating, and Sissy tries to kind of like explain a bit about Annie and like give us some more insight into her. We also see that like Steve sees Sissy as a person, not just Annie, which is also good, and they have like a little moment. We see the villain professor and Emery's mom arrive. They have kind of a little tiffle, and then they both kind of get lured into the garden for the ghosts to toy with. Something I do like about this is that the ghosts are willing to play in the daylight. It's not just like, oh, we have to sit around waiting until dark because the dark is when everything happens. No, the ghosts they operate on a 24/7 schedule, which I appreciate. It really keeps the plot moving. Vic discovers that Pam is undead. He hightails it back to the house. Emery, unfortunately, he doesn't want to let him in. He is insistent that Vic is probably already dead, and he doesn't want the tricks played on him by the house, so he does his not there, not there, not there trick. Turns out it doesn't work when the guy is still alive. So Vic dies of heart attack, scared to death outside of the house. And it's kind of Emery's fault, a little bit. So in part 3, Emery runs off alone after the scene with Vic, which of course he knows he's not supposed to do, but he's a character in a horror movie, so what else is he gonna do? He meets the actress again, who just really has such a big crush on him, it seems like. You know, she is determined that they're going to make such a cute couple. He also sees undead Pam, who he also wanted to bone. And, yeah, this just feels like a good appropriate punishment for being a misogynist dick.
I'm hard up, girls, but not quite that hard up.
So at this point, people are realizing that things are fucked up and they want to leave. The house isn't going to let them. Luckily, a few minutes later, Annie falls off a chair and bumps her head. Immediately, the doors open, so we get the sense that Annie is helping the house keep them all there. And then the doors close again, so they can't get out. Emery does try to get out in this tiny fraction of time, but his fingers get cut off. So it's a little gruesome. I'm not going to show it, but essentially he loses half of his fingers. Understandably, Emery is pretty upset about losing a few of his fingers.
Losing his fingers has affected his mind. You mustn't hold it against him.
And at this point, everyone is realizing that Annie is helping Rose Red to hold the doors closed. Whether consciously or unconsciously, how much she's participating and how much the house is just using her is unclear at this point. Emery has some helpful suggestions of trying to knock her out so that they can all escape.
We could pour some into a handkerchief and make her breathe it. Or what about drain cleaner? Just a whiff of that stuff and bingo, out like a light.
What are you talking about?
I'm talking about survival, darling. Did I stutter?
This is treated like it's the worst idea a human being could possibly have. Honestly, I think he has a point. If all you have to do to save the lives of like 6 other people is to temporarily make a girl unconscious for a few seconds, I think that's worth it. Like, obviously, it's not great that you have to do that, especially since she can't fully consent to it. But, like, I think she would want her sister to live, you know? Considering it really doesn't seem that bad. At first, all of his ideas are really horrible, but like they're just killing her. But after a while, he's like, let's just knock her out just for like 2 seconds. And I'm not convinced that that's not the right play here. Emery is treated like this is just the worst thing, but really, I think he has a point. So while everyone's arguing about that, Joyce has clearly figured things out more than everybody else has, and we see her she's lost it.
Supposing Rose Red is just the paranormal version of the Energizer Bunny, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing growing.
Stop it. You're crazy. Can you see that he's crazy?
I'm not crazy. I'm a mind reader.
She's getting super creepy about Annie because she knows that the house wants Annie, and all she wants is to do what the house wants so she can get her proof. At this point, it's wild to think that Joyce thinks she's getting out of the house with proof, but clearly she's not thinking rationally here. We also finally figure out what happened to the photographer. It's exactly what you thought happened to the photographer. So as they're all piecing together this stuff about Annie in the house, Nick also mentions that the house is channeling power through Steve as well. So Steve has previously said that he doesn't have any psychic powers, but apparently he's like some sort of psychic amplifier, like a speaker, and the house is like latched onto him as well. So I guess this leaves the door open for like, okay, you can knock Annie out, but like then you'd also have to knock out Steve, and like how many people are we gonna have to knock out if it's like feeding off of everybody? Maybe we couldn't knock Annie out and open the doors. And next, Kathy makes the brilliant decision to go off by herself. Multiple people have died, and she's just like, it's fine. I'm just gonna go for a little walk, clear my head. Excuse me. Miraculously, she survives. And they find Emery's mom. Emery's mom, not super happy. They tie her up and leave her there, which, like, feels essentially like killing her. Like, you know that the house wants to eat people, and then you just, like, essentially bait it. This terrible person, like, at least drag her back to the living room with everyone. They're making some questionable choices at this point. So Nick and Kathy are exploring. For some reason, the building is still under construction. We come to the realization that the building itself, the house, is recruiting builders because it wants to continue to build itself. Because apparently Ellen hasn't decided that the house is done yet. So it's going to just keep growing on its own, but it needs people and souls to be able to feed it, apparently. Also, Nick gets eaten. Rip Nick. We also figure out, through Kathy, that Ellen killed her husband. Frankly, good for her. He was a dick. Steve rescues Kathy in the attic from just a puppet. It's so clearly just like a foam mannequin.
And for trying to
They could have tried a little harder. I feel like they ran out of budget by this point. It's just not selling it. It just the way that he tackles her and she just goes floomp. It's just... So Emery decides to take things into his own hands and try to knock Annie out. As we've seen before, Annie doesn't take well to people trying to cause her harm. and she possesses a knight that almost kills him. It's nothing less than what he deserves. This prompts the group to try automatic writing to get through to Annie, since it seems like the house has just completely taken over her. And finally, Kathy is useful for something. Looks like it's time to finally get out of the house. Everyone is super excited about this possibility, except for Joyce. Joyce feels like the house is finally awakened. She can finally get the data that she needs. She tries to kill Annie. This does not go well for her.
Come on, Joyce, it's time to go.
Joyce ends up just choosing to stay with her data instead of trying to escape for the house, and Steve's a little upset about this, but eventually everybody leaves her to her fate. Emery finally gets a moment to kind of overcome his mother and redeem himself, and Steve gets a moment of just the Rimbauer men finally getting to say, no, I don't want to build the house, and like have that moment with Ellen, who is apparently still alive. I get the sense that she's like not undead in the way that everybody else is undead. She's kind of still alive, feeding off of the house. But like as a real physical being, and then he manages to kill her in some way. So everybody gets out. Annie uses her special psychic powers to destroy the house completely, which I'm sure saves Steve a lot of money in demo. That's kind of the movie. We get a little clip at the end of them kind of saying goodbye to the house as it's about to be demolished. Emery is like a decent human being now. Steve and Sissy are a couple, which is wonderful. So cute. And they're still going to turn the place into condos. Hey, what about farmland or something? What about a mall? Just not something that people are going to sleep in, at least. This feels like a bad choice, but okay, cool. Also, Kathy is there. I really didn't think she was going to make it through this movie, but she survives. So this series was critically panned when it came out. The ratings were great. It seems like it was a bit of a cult classic, but the critics hated this. I don't necessarily think that that's unfair. A lot of people said that the characters were really poorly written. I really liked these characters. I thought they were fun. I thought they had depth to them. Even people who were supposedly just all bad had some depth. They tried something with Annie. I thought everybody had like a decent character arc. I don't always connect to Stephen King's characters, but I thought these were really good. Reflecting on it, I think there's something about this that feels like good reality TV to me. You have a big ensemble cast, you have an evil producer, you have villains who you're rooting against, you have the good guys who you're rooting for, you have some fan favorites that are getting bumped off throughout the series, you have everybody trying to get out of the house is like a main goal. It feels kind of reality TV like to me, and I think it lights up all those kind of same centers in my brain. So like, I'm not saying that it's good. I'm just saying I like it. The book, on the other hand, The Diary of Ellen Rimbauer. I said we would get to it. I think it's gonna have to be a part 2 because this is just massive. But the book is really bad. It's so bad. It's really bad. It's, first of all, really racist. Like there's some problematic things in the TV series, but this just really racist, shockingly racist. That's, if you want to see part 2, like and subscribe, because I have some thoughts. We need to talk.